All right, we need to talk about the technical state of games launched by Konami, in particular where Metal Gear is concerned. Recently, we saw the launch of Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, the remake of MGS3, that essentially uplifts the graphics with Unreal Engine 5, but retains the vast majority of the original game, literally cutscenes, gameplay, assets, layout, game design, level design, encounters. Everything's just exactly one-to-one to what it was in the original title. They do make some additions and gameplay enhancements. And it's a really solid package overall. It's still that experience, but with spruced up graphics. So, it's something that overall has been positively received. But performance issues and technical issues is something that has been pervasive with this title, to the point where Konami's already had to issue this notice, this statement saying that we have received reports of several issues and are preparing a patch to address them. Beyond some things like, conditions where your game crashes, there's also performance, which is really poor for a game like this. When you look at the performance metrics on PlayStation 5 and even PC, it falls woefully below standards, woefully below what this experience should have been. It's not to a point where it utterly kills the gameplay experience. It, doesn't ruin the game, but it does detract from the smoothness. And thing is, this is not a first-time problem for Konami. We saw something similar happen with Metal Gear Solid Master Collection. You may recall that when that released, players were lambasting the collection because of missing options, vanished Steam pages, muddy textures, locked resolutions, and performance that has been diminished. MGS1, for example, for some reason, they decided to lock that at 30 frames per second in the Master Collection, and the metrics shown here just, it fell below expectations. And this is an unfortunate pattern because things like Metal Gear Solid Master Collection and, the Metal Gear Solid Delta MGS3 remake project, all of those are cool ideas, and I appreciate that they make those kinds of projects. But then they launch with all of these technical issues. And whatever your stance may be on Metal Gear continuing without Kojima, one thing you can be assured about Kojima is that he would never let his games launch in such technical states where performance issues and visual issues and crash issues are commonplace. So what's going on with Metal Gear Solid Delta specifically? Well, right here we have a pretty good summary from Synth Potato, who kind of outlined what Digital Foundry discovered in this video titled Metal Gear Solid Delta PS5 Pro Tech Review. A beautiful Unreal Engine 5 remake with frame rate issues. And I mean, just looking at this screenshot right here, you can see that, on PS5 Pro, it doesn't run ideally. In fact, PS5 Pro is the worst performing of the other options. Like base PlayStation 5 performance mode can at times look better than PS5 Pro and perform better than PS5 Pro. It doesn't make any sense. But Simpotato kind of summarizes it right here with major warning: if you're planning on playing Metal Gear Solid Delta, the game runs terribly, with PS5 rendering 720p to 1080p at 30 to 50 frames per second in performance mode, while the game outputs at 4K. It's got, essentially variable resolution, and it can dip all the way to like 720p. And it's not just that, given how old this game is, and while the graphics spruce up is really substantial, still, I've seen games that look better, that run better. You look at, Death Stranding 2. It's one of the most beautiful games of all time, period. And the performance on that is so freaking smooth. And a lot of people are citing that, it seems to be commonplace with Unreal Engine 5, but also with Konami specifically, this has been a pattern where they just didn't take that extra time needed to polish the performance. So this Synth Potato post continues. The PS5 Pro somehow runs worse and looks blurrier despite using PSSR. Another disastrous Unreal Engine 5 release. Again, still a good game, still an excellent game, and still playable and still functional and still good enough of an experience where you can get through it. But performance issues, especially for enthusiasts, it's something that is very noticeable, and it's not even just about the way it looks, it's about the way the game feels. The reason people like 60 FPS and beyond is that smoothness of gameplay, the responsiveness you get with your inputs that isn't quite as smooth and isn't as ideal when performance issues kind of make you feel like you're dragging along a little bit, and that is something that is pervasive with Metal Gear Solid Delta. Now, the PS5 Pro issue is one thing that is really worth highlighting here. So the thing that Digital Foundry noticed is that when things are in motion, PS5 Pro does kind of render things a little better. There's less artifacting compared to base PS5 modes. But then when you're standing still, there are times when the PS5 Pro, for some reason, just looks significantly blurrier. And this is actually pretty apparent in this particular screen grab, where even in the performance mode, there's just more detail on these bricks than this much more blurry, almost like out of focus looking wall here, and the grass here. There's just sharper elements here compared to the blurry kind of image that is the PS5 Pro version. And then performance-wise, as we scroll through this video, you can see that PS5 on performance mode, which is supposed to give you, that smooth 60 frames per second, has issues with that, especially in certain segments of the game. So, for example, in this bridge area, you can see the frame rate dipping into the 50s and, even into the 40s at times. You've got this sequence when Ocelot comes in Razvet with his soldiers, and when you play that sequence, frame rates dip into like the 40s, even into the 30s from time to time. So that is very much like right here, 39 frames per second as, barrels are exploding and, due to the fact that there is just more soldiers and assets kind of present in this particular sequence. And then they notice that underwater, when you dip into that, there's just a significant frame rate dip where even on performance mode, it dips to the 30s. And that right there, I think, is just woefully unacceptable for a game that is charging full price. And that is important to highlight. This game is $70. It is essentially a full price AAA game. And you look at something like Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered, which is basically a very similar kind of remaster or remake as Metal Gear Solid Delta. It is essentially an Unreal Engine 5 overlay of new graphics. That game, Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered, charged $50 for that experience. And so if you're going to charge $70 for a remake like this, where it is for the most part a graphics overhaul with some neat gameplay additions and enhancements, which is exactly what Oblivion Remastered did, if you're going to charge that extra $20 and make this almost like a full-fledged AAA release, then the quality bar expectation, especially where technical stuff is concerned, performance and visuals and whatnot, all of that stuff should be top-notch. And in the case of Metal Gear Solid Delta, as good a game as this is, when it comes to technical stuff, it's just not in the most ideal state that it could be, and it falls woefully short of that price point. And then beyond that, the PS5 Pro version of the game, which tries to combine performance and quality mode, so you get the best of both worlds, not only can look worse at times because of just more blurry images due to how PSSR renders things and the way that wasn't, I guess, is well optimized, but it even runs worse than base PS5 performance mode. As you can see right here, it's the same region and area, and the PS5 Pro dips by like 3 frames less than PS5 base performance mode. And as we kind of scroll through this, you can see that this is consistent across the board. I mean, in the bridge section here, it's a difference of like 7 frames per second. And this kind of trend continues across the board, save for like certain areas like this here where the base PS5 performs worse, but there are enough areas where the PS5 Pro does perform worse where it is just kind of baffling as to what happened here and why the PS5 Pro version wasn't as optimized and why it's not the most ideal way to play this game when it's running on a more powerful console. And it's not just Digital Foundry who found these results. You look at Destin's channel here, his video, Metal Gear Solid Delta performance is rough, and he discovered similar things. And people talk about this like day one patch. This is post day one patch, where we're seeing these kinds of performance dips into the 50s, 40s, and 30s. So yeah, I mean, right here, 36 frames per second on base PS5 performance, and it can be worse on PS5 Pro in certain scenarios. So this is consistent stuff across the board. And it's also worth noting that even in quality mode, which is supposed to be, high resolution graphics that is supposed to maintain that high resolution and run at a consistent 30 frames per second, that is also an area where this game does not thrive. You can see right here that while a lot of times it does retain 30 frames per second, there are moments where it does dip below 30 frames per second in more intensive scenes, and it doesn't output at, full 4K resolution. The resolution, varies, it dips and it undulates based on the scenarios. Right here we have Digital Foundry who've put together this chart that shows you what are the spectrums of resolutions across the different versions of PlayStation 5 consoles. And it's just a little disappointing to see, especially because the resolutions are lower than you might expect. But more importantly, I think the frame rate, the target frame rate not being hit consistently is an area that is a bit disappointing. And then in quality mode, there's also, even when things are running at a smooth 30 frames per second, a stable 30 frames per second, it doesn't really feel stable as described by Digital Foundry with the following clip.
30 FPS cap here runs with uneven frame pacing, which adds judder to motion. The game's
So yeah, uneven frame pacing is the issue that, say, like Bloodborne experienced on PlayStation 4, where even though it ran at a certain frames per second, it still somehow would feel a little jittery, and that's an issue that is pervasive with the quality mode of this game. So even the 30 FPS quality mode, even when it is kind of a stable 30 FPS, it doesn't feel that way. And then you look at PC performance, and it's not that different, with Nick Tech highlighting here how I'm finally able to get a stable 60 frames per second in Metal Gear Solid Delta on my Radeon RX 9070 XT plus R7 98X 3D combo. All you have to do is set the resolution to 720p and set FSR to performance mode. Basically, you have to reduce your game's visuals and resolution significantly in order to achieve a smooth 60 frames per second. Even when you're trying to run this game with a PC that has essentially top-tier hardware and specs. So you can clearly see that this game just needs a lot of work in the optimization and in the polish department, really. And it would have just been a really nice thing if Konami would have hit a home run with this instead of like a pretty good game with technical issues that kind of mars the launch experience, not to a point, again, where the game is completely ruined and it's unplayable, but to a point where it does detract from the experience for those who want a smooth performance and get a lot out of that. Some people have been trying to output the narrative that, man, if you complain that a game runs between 30 to 60 frames per second, then you're a whiny, spoiled brat. But John Linman from Digital Foundry, I think, put it aptly. He said, I don't think it's unfair to ask for stable performance, though. Unstable performance doesn't ruin games, but it absolutely detracts from the fun. Most of the best games do tend to run very well, as that contributes to a sense of fluidity and responsive control. And not to mention that Metal Gear Solid Delta is a full-fledged AAA game release priced at $70. That's a premium price point that I think warrants premium technical performance and just premium quality across the board. And for some, it's not just performance issues, but also major stutters that might actually make aspects of this game unplayable. So right here, we have this video by Z-Worms Gaming, who said this.
Oh my god, that was a massive stutter. Okay.
You can see the stuttering for this individual running this game on an RTX 5090.
Spent a lot of time loading the game for the first time, when I first
the fact that these kinds of performance issues can crop up is just not something we want to normalize, especially with Konami making this a pattern.
This will happen a lot. What the heck, dude? This is not playable.
Again, with MGS Collection Volume 1, technical issues. And now with Metal Gear Solid Delta, technical issues. And I think if they want to win back the Metal Gear fan base after Kojima's departure, then they have to really nail everything. And one thing that Kojima often nailed was the technical stuff, the polish, the performance. All of that was always top-notch, and kind of Konami needs to step up to that plate if they want to continue the Metal Gear saga and it be received kind of overwhelmingly positive at launch without major points of criticism. And I think these kinds of performance issues are worth highlighting and are worth criticizing. Now, look, mileage may vary, especially for those who are on PC. Maybe this game is just more compatible with certain hardware, so it might be performing well enough for you. But there's enough variables with the game's performance that clearly this is a pervasive enough issue being highlighted by enough news outlets and reputable sources who have done testing with this game that this is something that Konami does need to address. And they have acknowledged it here on their Twitter post where they did talk about performance issues, but it does essentially add to another list of these statements where, a game falls short at launch because they didn't take the time to fully polish and flesh everything out. This is, right here is a popular image of all of the statements from all of the AAA companies who've released statements apologizing and saying we're listening and, we'll fix this, but it should have been fixed at launch. But yeah, for those who've been wondering about what's the discussion surrounding Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, the performance issues has dominated the conversation somewhat, despite all of the positive elements that Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater should be praised for, all the gameplay enhancements, the graphics enhancements. It is, if they fix the performance issues, possibly the ultimate way to play this game is definitely just the quality of life features added on top. There's just really good stuff here. A lot of consideration was placed in the development of this title, and you can tell that they approached it with love, but they just needed more time to cook to really flesh out the performance issues that can get in the way of the most smooth, the most ideal, the least intrusive experience. But that's kind of what you need to know right now, and I'm sure over time they will eventually fix this. But the normalization of ship now, fix later is dangerous, and Konami seems to be getting comfortable with that, especially with Metal Gear Collection Volume 1, highlighting technical issues that they're okay letting go at launch, and now Metal Gear Solid Delta experiencing something similar. Like, delay these games by a month or two if you need to ensure the best release possible. If you want to, truly home run a launch, especially of a Metal Gear game. But that's one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the state of Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. If you've played the game yourself, what do you think of it overall? And what is your experience when it comes to the game's performance and visuals and resolution and all these things? Share your thoughts and your experiences in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.